welcome all to the Podcast Village studios this morning. Mike, why don't you get us started?
Sure. Yep. We're here with Kevin Esser of G2 Ops. I'm going to let Kevin explain a little bit more about G2, but just kind of going off your website, you guys work a lot in cybersecurity and model-based systems engineering.
That's correct. We're a small business. Those really are our two core focuses. And the reason we are in those two domains is really because we think those are two core domains that every organization needs to do well to succeed.
Right.
I mean, they are really requirements for a healthy organization, whether you're a large government agency,
Sure.
A small local business.
Mm-hmm.
You need to be doing the way you design and manage and sustain your business,
Mm-hmm.
and the way you do security nowadays are very, very important.
Mm-hmm.
So those are the domains that we want to be in. We believe strongly in them, and we've been honestly growing quickly. So
Okay.
I'm very happy about that.
What was your genesis? I'm not looking at the website right now. How did you get started on this path before we get to the meatier questions?
Right. So long story short, so our business focus is in the government domain at the moment. We have some commercial
Mm-hmm.
clients, but largely we're in the government domain. And the cybersecurity portion really grew almost 20 years ago. The Navy was developing a new platform. They were really kind of ahead of their time in thinking about security. They didn't really understand the dynamic. They hadn't really quantified the threat, but they understood this new platform they were designing. They wanted to build for the long term, and so they knew they needed to think about how to steel it against security threats 20, 25, 30 years from then. This
Wow.
was the early 90s. And so I kind of stepped in at that point and said, hey, I'd like the opportunity to help, define what the requirements were, honestly, for doing that. And so that was really my first project. When I joined G2, we continued with that same client. And we've continued with that customer, and we've added many more doing similar things. And so we took that and grew it into doing security for large global networks, large enterprise networks, but also working, where we started in smaller tactical systems that are deployed in very challenging, very unique areas. They each have different kind of threats, and they have different requirements on how to keep their data and their people secure.
And the timeline, I'm sorry, what did you say, 25 years in the future that you were thinking about back then? Are you still trying to guess at the 25-year window, or does that change?
Cybersecurity, and just like with any kind of information technology element, is moving so quickly.
That's why I asked the question.
Yeah, it's a great question. Things move so quickly; it's almost dizzying. And so it depends on the client, kind of. You talk about a government agency, which has to work through an accountable acquisition system to design, procure, and sustain a system.
Right.
So they're required to look out 30 years or so. Over
Really?
the life
Okay.
That's their requirement, and they have to put their cost models together to do that. And so they have to think about requirements and sustainability. And cybersecurity is one of those things. And so it is almost impossible to look out 30 years at what a threat.
I can't imagine.
Environment's going to be. It's hard to look ahead 6 months. It's changing so quickly.
And that kind of brings us to our first question. So, with how quickly and rapidly technology is changing and evolving, what are you guys doing on a regular basis to kind of combat cybersecurity issues, maybe unforeseen, or say something you haven't come across in the past?
Sure. So one of the ways is to get and cultivate great people. That's something that any business could say. But in the domain that we're in, where things move so quickly, both sides of the equation for us move really, really quickly. So we are always one run down, one length behind, from a cybersecurity standpoint. The bad guy's always in the lead, always. He has to find one hole. We have to fill them all, or help our clients do that.
Sure.
So getting great people and sustaining them means putting a focus on continuing education, making sure we have people that have industry certifications is part of that, maintaining those certifications is a part of that. But really more important, you have to recognize culturally within your organization, you never stop learning. You have to realize you don't know it all. You're never going to know it all.
Right.
You're never really an expert. You have to keep learning. And so all of my guys know, and I work my guys hard, that they have a mandate to maintain.
To push the window.
To push the envelope. We have a requirement to do that. Our adversaries are very, very good at what they do, and they're getting better every day. We have to be the same.
Yeah.
So I imagine it's constant learning and education on your part and finding ways to educate yourselves in new areas.
That's exactly right. And there's some standard ways to do that. It's important to keep up with literature, to keep up with periodicals, to read, to expose yourself to new things. But it's also important to get out there into industry, into the community, and collaborate. And so, we have several partnerships. One of the ones I want to kind of highlight is with the Cybersecurity Forum Initiative, which is kind of a military-focused organization that's grown to almost 25,000 people today.
Wow.
We're an operational sponsor for them. We help them with training and trade a lot of ideas. And the point is to be out there and thinking about cyber warfare as a domain. And cyber warfare applies to the small business as well as to the nuclear submarine.
Right.
We are in a war to protect our information, to protect our intellectual property. And so people need to be thinking about all those things.
Pretty front of mind considering this news just last week, right? With the federal government in China, right? Am I remembering correctly?
The compromises at OPM agency.
Yeah,
So
thank you.
I'm glad you brought that up. It's interesting to start to kind of connect the dots on those things. So you look at what is,
I'm sure.
Whether your threat is the local kid looking to steal your credit card or a nation state with the resources that they can bring to bear. You have to look at things a little bit differently. So if you're the federal government, you have to think about the nation state. And so China, for example, I don't think it's too difficult, and I'm certainly not the first person to connect the dots here. The Anthem compromises healthcare data, lots and lots and lots of data, personal data. Overlay that on top of 4 million people's clearance information. Start layering those things on top of, I think you guys can see what the plan there is. Yeah. So, and that's really what, as a cybersecurity service provider, we have to think like the attacker thinks. What is his objective? What is he trying to accomplish for each of the clients that we're with? And those objectives are different.
Fascinating. Yeah. Wow. Yeah, and you probably meet some pretty interesting people when trying to find people who can think that way.
You do, and one of the things that we try and do is spend a lot of time, as much time as we can, with national labs, with people from national labs, with people from academia, try to collaborate on things. Because a lot of people think about security from an appliance standpoint. I can buy a firewall. I can buy an intrusion detection system. I can buy antivirus. In fact, mine's probably due. I need to renew it. Okay, those are some of the things that you can do. But what if you had ways to keep your infrastructure secure without those appliances by designing it in a completely different way? And so we're trying to work with some of the organizations on the leading edge to help our customers understand different ways to design from the ground up to make themselves not dependent on those appliances and refreshing those appliances every time industry changes. So get out of that loop, so to speak.
So that's great. And why don't we segue into the model-based systems engineering, or MBSE? And I hope you'll explain that just briefly to a non-engineer and someone who can't put together really anything. What aspects of the MBSE environment do organizations find appealing, or why are companies switching over to this? And this probably ties into cybersecurity as well.
It really does. It really does. And the two are very symbiotic. And it was a natural progression for us to move from cybersecurity into a better way to do systems design, a better way to do system engineering and sustainment. And so I think maybe the best way to explain it is to use an example. So something we all have in our pockets right now, which is a cell phone. If you look at your cell phone, and today's smartphone will seem ancient, 6 months from now, but today's cell phone includes a microprocessor, an RF radio frequency transmitter and receiver, a microphone, control logic and software and firmware that link all those things together, along with memory and storage, and a motherboard that enable an almost infinite set of capabilities and functions. You can go, whether it's through the Google Store or, Apple's App Store, and come up with millions, literally, of applications that you can use to enable your smartphone. So you start to think about the complexity of putting that device together. That device that fits in your hand has many, many, many vendors. It has many components. It has a requirement for standards and interface requirements and integration activities, lots of mini design efforts. How do you bring all that together and do it efficiently? How do you herd all the cats together to bring that device together in something that a consumer is going to want and love? And so one of the ways that we used to do that as a kind of systems engineering community was very focused on documentation. You built a specification. You wrote down requirements. You built a picture of your topology, how you were going to connect all the devices within your smartphone, for example. So what model-based system engineering is trying to do that in a fundamentally different way. And so it's using a model, which is a software tool suite, to bring all that data formatted into one place. So your logistician, your requirements analyst, your design engineer, the guy who's thinking about sustainment, who's thinking about hardware and software code development, they're all working with the same data in the same model. And what we found is, and this is the bottom line, is it increases your return on investment. You have a limited number of investment dollars to build your device, or deploy your system. You want to make the most of those investment dollars on the backside, in your return. Okay. And so MBSE we find is really ramping up that return on investment, because we're allowing people to work more efficiently, more collaboratively, within one data set, basically.
And now you mentioned kind of at the beginning, and having just said all this, kind of the timeline for G2. You try not to look too far ahead, and really you can't. But personally, where do you see G2 evolving in the next, say, 5-10 years?
Okay, good question. What we've talked about internally, so where we see growth maybe is a good place to start.
Sure.
So our cybersecurity services have focused on large commercial clients in the government,
Right.
large interests with similar concerns. But where we really see a need is in the small and medium business area. If you look at a threat actor, China's a great example. They're not just interested in military secrets. They're interested in credit card data. They're
Right.
interested in healthcare information. Businesses have to be thinking about their intellectual property and data they have
Sure.
as very valuable and interesting to threat actors for lots of different reasons, things that they aren't conceiving. So where we would like to go in the future is to kind of marry our ability to model a small or medium business's infrastructure. We want to help them understand, what is your threat surface area? What does that mean to you? How do you interact with your clients? How do you interact with vendors? How many databases do you have? Are they in the cloud? Are they local? Where do you keep your data? Helping them understand where their vulnerabilities are through our modeling, our MBSE, kind of methodology, and then using our cybersecurity expertise to build the right solution for them. When it's different for everybody, it can be very, very unique.
Can you give us a quick description of the types of small, medium-sized businesses, or is it run across the board, or is there a specific niche that you guys target?
Right, it really runs across the board. So a good example would be, say, a retail clothing store, with only a couple of, franchise outlets.
Right.
So, they have point of sale systems.
Sure.
They have to hold and transmit credit card data. And they have back office financial systems where they keep track of their accounting. They have personnel and human resources data, which they may maintain locally. They may maintain in the cloud. They may have connectivity between their stores. They may have people that work at home, consultants that do certain things for them, maybe design their end caps, things like that. All those things need to be kind of mapped out and modeled. We need to talk to the client about, how do you work? How do your systems interact with each other? And then put together the right set of solutions for them. So that's kind of a small, not really medium business, but Target comes to mind.
Sure.
And Walmart,
That
very,
makes
very large
sense.
business, obviously. But
Sure. Target. Yeah.
take that retail model and blow it up huge.
Yeah.
They have point of sale systems and exposure there,
Yeah.
obviously, and they have massive logistics and sustainment operations that are global.
It's staggering.
Staggering. Lots and
Yeah.
lots of points of entry, lots and lots of different data interactions to
Right.
think about. What our modeling expertise allows us to do is to look at that holistically. Maybe for the first time in an organization, an end-to-end understanding of what their infrastructure looks like and where they might want to make changes to be more secure. Not always hardware or software. Sometimes it's awareness training. Sometimes it's changing a process.
Sure. You find all sorts of things when you do that.
One thing too, and I'll throw this out there, my partners laugh when I say this, is we're visual, right? Isn't there a UPS ad out there that talks about how he's a building contractor, and he's talking about, he shows a 2-dimensional blueprint of a new home to his client. His client says, I don't like it, and so he goes to the UPS store, he prints out, makes a 3-dimensional model, shows to her, she says, I love it. So, and I think his quote is, people are visual.
Yeah,
So
right.
sometimes you just have to present data, and modeling helps you do this in a way that allows your client
To comprehend it.
Right,
Yeah.
see things in a different way.
Sure.
Comprehend strengths and weaknesses where maybe he didn't understand where he had them before.
Sure.
And we see gains in that area every day. It's amazing, actually.
Boy, it brings to mind a lot of questions about awareness at that level, the medium, small businesses, and how unaware they are of so many aspects of their business. I'm sure that we could name dozens right now that they're just not even monitoring, not even aware of. That's potentially a threat. And I mean, the potential for this is sort of enormous and horrifying.
It is.
Because of the scare factor, and because we hear these stories, So
Yeah. It's funny because I don't need a marketing team to explain to the world how we're vulnerable, because
Sure.
it's in the news
It's
every
in the news.
single
Yeah,
day.
that's where I was headed. Yeah.
Yeah, no, and that's
Yeah.
exactly right. And sometimes fixes are not necessarily as expensive as people think. We will come in and sit down with the client and say, hey, look, let's start with the easy things,
Sure.
and make some changes here. You'll be amazed at the return you get on that investment, and then we can look at the harder things, later on. It's not always a big dollar item fix.
Sure.
Okay, so speaking of small businesses, you guys are a small business yourself and need to use other services in order to make your business successful. So how does G2 use Intelligent Office's services?
Yeah, no, I'm glad you asked. So, kind of established G2 Ops. One of the things that we wanted to do was put together an organization that didn't just put lip service to saying we put our people first. They really are our most valuable asset. We have nothing if I don't have smart, engaged, motivated, hardworking people who want to get up in the morning and come into work and sprint. Not just work, but sprint as hard as they can. One of the ways you do that is put together a work environment that fits the way they want to work and the way they can be effective. And so we are largely a virtual organization. We have people all over the country, from time to time all over the world, depending on where the client takes us. We use Intelligent Office to give us that place where we when we need to come together, we can.
Sure.
When we need to collaborate, we can. When I need to throw a model up on a large screen for a client, I can do that. So Intelligent Office is really good for that.
Very cool. Well, thank you, Kevin. I think that's all the questions.
There's so much more we can talk about it. I'd like to ask specific business questions, but we'll save that for another time. So thank you so much for coming into the studios, and thank you, ladies, for being here and not chiming in and interrupting. No, I'm just kidding. Thank you so much. Have a great day. Anything left, Michael?
No, I think that's it. Thank you, Kevin. This has been excellent, and appreciate your time.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity. I appreciate it.